Welcome to this week's episode. I'm the Chicken Yogi, and this week I want to talk about how our story and our personal story that we process based on where we feel our place is in the world and where we take in what other people tell us, how that affects our liberation and our living our true authentic selves. Sound like a good conversation? I sure hope so. Let's get started. This is the Chicken Yogi Show, hosted by the Chicken Yogi, Kit Kilstow. Kit is a spiritual mentor who shares spiritual wisdom to help neurodivergent people remember who they are. They believe that we all deserve full liberation and radical self-acceptance and love. Learn more and receive a free gift when you subscribe at chickenyogi.com. And now, this week's show. The truth is, our stories are not created in a vacuum. Our stories start when we are children. They are based upon things which we are told or which we pick up from those in our lives, even if we're not specifically told these items. But, we also pick it up from the people we go to school with, our teachers, other adults in our lives. And all of this combines into our personal story. And the personal story either gets affirmed and kind of continues growing and building its own mythology, so to speak, as we go through our life and, move from being a child into an adult and possibly move into the workforce or college, wherever our future plans take us. And at some point in your adulthood, it's called in pop culture the midlife crisis, but I argue that it doesn't have to start in midlife. That at some point we need to examine our stories and find out what's true for us. Because if you've been living, 20, 30, 40 years or more, and you realize you've been living with a story that isn't your own, a story that doesn't match who you are, that can cause dissonance. And that dissonance and disconnect from our true selves can lead to burnout and frustration. It also, in a spiritual sense, can lead to the dark night of the soul or a spiritual disconnect or a spiritual crisis. Because depending on what those stories are and where those stories come from, you may all of a sudden be faced with the fact that the world really isn't the way it was explained to you, or you may be faced with the fact that, hey, these people were feeding you this narrative, and maybe they did so out of a desire to protect you or a desire for what's best for you, but that narrative really shaped how you thought about yourself. And I know I'm speaking in very broad terms here because I can't know. I'm not psychic to know what your story is. I know what my stories are. I know how those stories have affected me. And if you'll indulge me for a moment, I suspect they may sound familiar to you too. I did not realize until my late 40s that I was neurodivergent. And so because of this, I basically grew up being told I was strange or weird. I never fit in. I didn't have a lot of friends. I also grew up with some dreams and desires that really didn't fit in with my family or what my family thought that somebody should do. And it's not on their, it's not their fault. My mom was a nurse. My dad did kind of mechanical lawn care type stuff. And so the fact that their child grew up wanting to do things like write books or work on a horse farm, those were things outside of their experience. And they seemed like really big, far off dreams that maybe weren't accessible because living in rural Midwest, basically you kind of grew up, stayed close to home, got a job, and whatever job you got was what was available. There wasn't a lot of aspirations. There wasn't a lot of dreams. And in fact, as I say quite a bit, in high school, I knew what I wanted to do. And so my guidance counselor basically went, phew, don't have to deal with that one, and didn't do much guiding. And now as I'm, pursuing a master's degree, I'm thinking, why didn't somebody tell me that there was all these amazing opportunities and amazing things to learn? That becomes part of your story. And so the growing up feeling disconnected, feeling outside, feeling like you're an outsider, feeling alone, feeling isolated, that is pretty common to those of us who are neurodivergent. Now, you can add to that or maybe shift gears a little bit. And if you deal with a chronic illness or a chronic pain, there's a lot of, again, feeling like you can't do what you want to do, that your body has betrayed you. There's a lot of stories like that. And again, I feel those in my heart because of my chronic illnesses as well. And all of that comes together as your story. How do those stories affect your liberation and living your authentic self? Well, the truth is, when you're told these things as a child, you don't know any better. You trust the adults, or you may trust the adults in your life. Even if you don't really trust them, you're told you should listen to your teachers, that your teachers know best, that the adults in your life know best for you. And that's even a message that I see being taught in, some of the children's programming today, always look to the adults in your life for guidance. Well, that's all well and good if the adults in your life are offering good guidance. And some of that comes from having to face their own trauma, their own stories, their own stuff. And, let's be honest, even those of us who grew up in a loving family household, and I'm hesitant to say that because while my family loved me, and I have no doubt about that, I also know there was a lot of intergenerational trauma going on. There were quite a few adverse childhood experiences, those ACE scores. And so when I say loving family, I don't want to, bring the image that it was some sort of idyllic TV sort of family, because it wasn't. But even when you know that you have adults in your life that are caring for you the best that they can, when you're a child, you don't understand things like ACE scores or intergenerational trauma or why people are doing things. You just simply accept what the adults in your life tell you is true. Even if it's well-meaning, even if it contributes to those stories that get in the way of you living your authentic life. Once you become an adult, things change, the dynamic changes. When you are a child, when you're under the age of majority in your country or wherever you are kind of stuck with the people in your life. Hopefully you have adults in your life that are able to adapt, that are able to support you. But, let's be honest, most of us didn't. And so what happens is once you become an adult, all of a sudden you're responsible for those decisions and you really aren't answerable to any parental figures. Now, there's some caveats to that. If you still live at home, if you live with an older relative, perhaps because you're doing some caretaking duties, then the dynamic kind of changes a bit. And I noticed that myself when my mother moved in with us due to her health. Even though I was well into adulthood and had lived on my own for quite a long time, there was still all of a sudden that parent-child dynamic that comes into play. So even though you're an adult, a lot of times those emotions and those feelings come back when you're forced into close proximity with the adults that you had in your life. So, but once you're an adult, you pretty much can start doing whatever you want in terms of how you live your life, because you're no longer dependent on other people for food, clothing, and shelter. And again, there's a lot of socioeconomic things I could get into there. So I'm speaking in broad general terms. Once you are in that position, though, all of those stories that came into your life that you took in as a child, they're still there. And unless you go through those stories and start thinking what's true, what isn't true, then all of a sudden you're going to be stuck with those stories, and they're going to affect your adulthood and your future. Which means oftentimes you are in a position where you may not know who you are. And this is something I think I'll, pick up more on in some future podcasts, because that, again, trying to find your authentic self. Well, I mean, that's what I do as the chicken yogi. That's what I do as a spiritual mentor. I help people do that, because you kind of feel lost, because when you start unraveling the stories, the biggest question that you're going to ask yourself is, am I doing this because somebody, whether that's some voice from your past, some voice in your brain, tells you that you should do this? Or are you doing this because you want to? And again, hey, we live in a capitalist society. A lot of people go to work and earn a living because they need to pay the bills. And so what I'm talking about are the things that you do, the dreams that you're pursuing, the goals that you're pursuing outside of that. I mean, there are simply some things in our life that you have to do whether you want to or not. And that's where, we can talk a lot about employment for neurodivergent, chronically ill, and disabled folks, and talk a lot about our society and socioeconomic issues. But there's also hopefully some things that you do outside of that. You may have hobbies, you may have crafts. If you're in college, there may be a reason why you're in college, or a dream that you're pursuing. And when you start thinking about them, then that's where you ask yourself, am I doing this because I should, because it's the right thing to do? For example, my leaving college in the 90s and going to get a job working in customer service. I was doing the thing that I was supposed to do. I was getting the quote unquote good job so I could move out of my parents' house. That's the sort of thing. One way that you can know whether you're on that path, and again, I'm going to use myself as an example here, is when you're following or pursuing a goal. And so in my case, it's my education. I'm currently pursuing a master's degree in religious studies. I've talked about it. And I'm realizing I'm really honing in my focus on disability liberation. And lots to talk about there, lots of different aspects to come into it. I hope to include some of that in terms of not just yoga philosophy and the liberation that yoga brings, but also the, liberation, theological liberation, and that depending on spiritual beliefs. But I don't want to take ours too far off track. But that is clearly something that sounds very niche-y. It's a niche. It's not something that everybody studies. It's not something that when you mention that degree, somebody says, oh yeah, it's not like being a doctor or a lawyer where, oh yeah, you can, there's lots of jobs for that. Where what happens is this little voice in my head goes, what are you going to do with that? What's going to, and I know what I want to do with that. And, I'm happy to expound upon that if people were to ask me. And every time I explain what I want to do with it, people are like, oh yeah, that's great. That sounds wonderful. But there's that little voice in my head that tells me every once in a while that it's not practical. It's not what I should be doing. That's how I know that those stories are coming back that I was told as a kid, and not to pursue dreams and not to pursue what I want to do, because that doesn't happen to people like us. That was one of the big messages I got. And so when I hear that little voice or that little question, I can pause and go, thank you for trying to protect me, people from my past, but this is what I want to do, and this feels amazing, and it's going to work out, and I can move forward from there. And so when you start to unravel those stories, you start to unravel or, unwind the disconnect and discordance in your life. You start to get down to your true self. It's like, do you really like eating, and I'm just going to use a common thing that's thrown on online, pineapple on pizza. Is it something you're eating because you enjoy it? Is it something you're eating because you just want to go along to get along or make somebody else happy? That would be the question to ask when it comes to unraveling those stories. And what that has to do with liberation is, at its very core, liberation, whether we're talking about liberation through yoga, which is liberating ourselves from the disconnect between the spirit, the life force, whatever term you want to call it, and the physical realm and physical matter. Whether it is liberating ourselves from old thoughts, liberating ourselves from societal norms that may not suit us, whether it's liberating ourselves from those stories, or liberating ourselves from the belief that we are broken, or liberating ourselves from the belief that we're somehow not whole. Whatever angle that liberation takes, when you're looking at those stories, when you start to unwind those stories, that is really what liberation is all about. When we talk about, for example, social liberation, we want to liberate our society, liberate people from the stories that our society tells. For example, poverty is a moral failing. That is a story that society tells, our culture tells, especially here in America, that isn't true, and that we need to liberate ourselves from in order to lift everybody up and liberate them. So when we look at our stories that we have digested over the course of our lives, liberating ourselves from them to make sure that we are actually getting to our true core authentic essence, the heart of what we want to do, that leads to spiritual liberation for neurodivergent people. That leads to neurodivergent liberation, disability liberation, all sorts of liberation. I mean, I could go on, but it really goes ahead and it really takes us to that next level, like throwing off the stories or what weighs us down. So the way that we do that is through really strong self-examination. And the work is not easy. The work takes a long time. And in fact, I was just speaking to a friend earlier today, and I said, it sounds very weird, but I feel like, it has taken me the last 5 years or so to really kind of sort through everything and finally figure out who I am and what I want to do. And it's a process. It really is. And that's hard to understand in our world when our society and our culture is full of quick fixes. And, take a pill, you'll be better. The fact that there's a process that could take years and it's years of incremental process. There'll be big aha moments, but there also would be moments where you feel like nothing is changing, nothing is going on until it does. And so the fact that it's a long, slow process of sorting through, because you don't just, go through your stories, throw out what doesn't work for you and move on. Those stories creep back. Those stories show up in different ways. Those stories show up in ways that you may not expect or understand until you look at it and go, oh, that's where that's coming from. So as a spiritual mentor, as a coach, especially a coach focused on yoga philosophy, that is something that I hold space for that. And also, my job is to provide an outside viewpoint, because a lot of times we can't see what's changing or what's growing in our mind because we're so close to it. Where if you speak with somebody, be like, oh yeah, remember, last week or last month you were, dealing with this, and now, things have shifted for you. And then having that pointed out by somebody who really has, I don't want to say no personal connection to you, because there is a connection in that mentor-mentoree relationship, but somebody who isn't a friend or a family member. Because I think we feel like friends or family members say things to be nice or because they have to, where a relative stranger, somebody who you're working with in a professional capacity, part of what professionals are paid for is to provide some tough love when necessary. So when you're working through those stories, it really is good to have somebody there that you can talk to. And again, this could be a mental health professional. It could be a spiritual mentor. It could be a member of the clergy. It could be, somebody professionally in your life that will help you work through those things. And so what you do is, just when you feel things are out of sync, when you feel like you're not moving in the direction you want to move, is just pause and ask yourself, is this something I really want to do? Or is this something that I'm being told I should do? And once you find that answer, that will help you unravel those stories. Or again, I'm feeling this way. Am I feeling this way because I was told I should feel this way? Or am I feeling this way because it's authentic and because it is something that I really feel and is coming from deep inside me rather than what somebody told me? So that is a very broad overview of the stories that we tell ourselves and how that affects our liberation, how that affects our autistic, our neurodivergent liberation, how that affects our spirituality. I want to dive into this topic in more detail. I feel like I say that on every show, but I want to think about this topic in more detail, and I encourage you to reach out. You can go ahead and head on over to chickenyogi.com or podcast.chickenyogi.com and go ahead and contact me. I would love to hear your thoughts on this show. And also, feel free to like, subscribe, follow on any platform that you're listening to this podcast on. And if something resonates with you, feel free to share it, on your own social media. Word of mouth is sometimes the best way to get things out. And so if what I'm saying is resonating with you, there's a good chance it'll resonate with somebody that you're connected with. But until next time, I want to thank you for being on the Chicken Yogi Show, and be kind to yourself. And of course, don't forget to crow and flow. Thank you for listening to the Chicken Yogi Show, hosted by the Chicken Yogi, Kit Kaelstow. Kit's passion is creating neurodivergent liberation in all its forms through spiritual and creative mentoring. Remember who you were before you were told who you couldn't be. The Chicken Yogi Show is distributed on the Muse Charmer Network. Learn more at chickenyogi.com and subscribe to our newsletter while you're there for a free gift. Please follow the podcast at podcast.chickenyogi.com or on your favorite podcast app or platform, and check out all the shows on the Muse Charmer Network at musecharmer.com. Subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts. Music is Running with the Horses by Purple Planet Music. Their website is purple-planet.com. This show is copyright 2024, all rights reserved by the Chicken Yogi and Kit Kaelstow.